Arizona, 1944. The sun had long since scorched the desert plains, yet the nights carried an unexpected chill. 12 German prisoners of war stood outside the wooden barracks, dust clinging to worn boots. Uniforms faded from sun and sweat, their eyes fixed on an improbable sight. Stacks of warm blankets neatly folded, waiting for them. A gift so ordinary in appearance, yet so astonishing in context. Men hardened by frost artillery and months of captivity, suddenly faced with softness, warmth, and comfort objects they could scarcely believe existed in the harsh desert heat. Diary entries preserve the immediacy of disbelief. Private Wilhelm wrote, "Wir glauben es nicht. We are given warmth, thick, soft, tangible. It smells like home, impossible and yet real." Guards' reports confirmed the scene. Prisoners approached cautiously, fingers brushing edges, eyes wide. Murmurs and soft exclamations observed. No complaints, all cooperative. Shadows stretched long across crates and barracks, light bouncing off worn helmets, illuminating astonished expressions. A moment suspended between reality and imagination. Folklore emerged almost instantly. Soldiers whispered tales of blankets that seemed to grow warmer as they held them. Stories of men tucking themselves in, imagining distant hearths, reliving memories of home. One soldier supposedly wrapped himself completely, declaring the desert night had been tamed. Such tales, whispered from bunk to bunk, soon blended with factual records, creating a narrative both real and magical. A testament to the human need for comfort and hope in confinement. Gestures became amplified. Hands trembled as blankets were unfolded, fingers tracing threads. Glances exchanged silently, communicating permission to believe, to trust, to accept the improbable. Laughter bubbled quietly, suppressed yet impossible to contain. A corporal carefully smoothed a blanket over a comrade, whispering, "It feels like winter at home." Small acts of human tenderness asserting themselves quietly against monotony, routine, and authority. Camp records provide clinical corroboration. Logs note distribution of 150 blankets between 0600 to 1000 hours. Prisoners' reactions classified as attentive and cooperative. Quantitative measures noting 0 complaints, minor infractions absent. Yet numbers alone fail to capture the living astonishment, the fleeting awe, the tactile sensation of warmth, the small smiles exchanged under the morning sun, the human heartbeat responding to a simple, improbable kindness. The desert environment magnified the effect. Dust swirling with every footstep, the faint howl of coyotes in the distance, the whisper of wind through sparse trees, juxtaposed with the softness of fabric in calloused hands. Light and shadow choreographing an unspoken cinematic narrative. Photographs and memoirs capturing men seated or standing, blankets, draped, expressions frozen between awe, disbelief, and gratitude. Even minor actions carried significance. Whispered comments, subtle nudges, hands sharing warmth. Ephemeral gestures forming a network of connection and morale. A theater of resilience, enacted quietly beneath watchful guards against the vast expanse of desert sky. Fact and folklore intertwined seamlessly. Diaries, photographs, and oral histories preserving moments that exceeded the mundane, transforming a simple distribution of blankets into a tableau of astonishment, human warmth, and shared experience. Decades later, veterans would recall the sensation. The weight of fabric, the softness of wool, the improbable kindness. Laughter, whispers, and astonishment replayed in memory. Ordinary objects transformed into symbols of comfort and humanity. Moments that transcended confinement. Light, warmth, and hope preserved in memory. A cinematic snapshot of human resilience, subtle yet unforgettable. Thus begins the story of German POWs in Arizona, 1944. Confronted with the improbable warmth of blankets. Moments that turned monotony into astonishment. the desert into a stage, and ordinary gifts into legends of humanity. Moments that would echo long after the barracks fell silent. July 1944. The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly across the desert plains, long shadows stretching across rows of wooden barracks tents, flapping faintly in a dry breeze. Dust rose with each footstep, mingling with the faint smell of sweat earth and sun-baked wood. 12 German POWs moved slowly across the camp uniforms, worn and dusty helmets balanced awkwardly on heads, or dropped to the ground, eyes drawn toward a stack of blankets neatly folded on crates. The air was thick with anticipation, disbelief, and curiosity, each man carrying months of monotony, fatigue, and uncertainty on his shoulders. The camp itself was a study in austere functionality. Wooden barracks, aligned with rigid precision tents, punctuating the open spaces, fences of barbed wire surrounding the perimeter guard towers looming silently in the distance. Every detail accounted for in official records. Yet, these details did little to capture the atmosphere of human tension, expectation, and surprise that unfolded each morning when the blankets were distributed. The ordinary architecture and routine imbued suddenly with cinematic significance. Each shadow crate and tent forming part of a living tableau. Reports from the period note the arrival of supplies. 150 blankets delivered over the course of several weeks, inspected, logged, and carefully distributed. Distribution schedules detailed to the hour. Prisoners assigned to specific rows. Crates arranged for seating guards, instructed on handling, and minor infractions noted with precision. Yet behind these dry, factual reports lay the pulse of human response. Astonishment, disbelief, and gratitude recorded not just in logs, but in diaries, letters, and oral histories. The emotional resonance, invisible to the ledger, yet palpably real. Private Wilhelm wrote in his diary, "We approached cautiously, hands hovering over the soft fabric. Disbelief etched on every face. It smelled of warmth of home. Impossible. And yet it was true." Dietrich added, "I could not stop myself from touching the folds, from feeling the softness against calloused hands, a sensation I had not known in months. And yet here it was, undeniable and almost absurd." These personal accounts reveal a rich texture of human reaction, the slow unfolding of astonishment and wonder. Gestures, tentative laughter, cautious eyes wide with disbelief. A scene both ordinary and extraordinary simultaneously. The psychological dimension of the context cannot be overstated. Months of captivity, isolation, and monotony had compressed human response into ritualized routines. Every step, gesture, and glance calculated. And yet the blankets disrupted this equilibrium, an anomaly introduced into the regimented system, a spark that elicited emotion, social interaction, and shared delight. Even minor gestures became charged with meaning. A hand resting briefly on a crate, a glance exchanged between men, a subtle nod of approval, all layered into the cinematic fabric of the morning distribution. The environment itself contributed to the sensory tableau. The desert stretching endlessly in the distance, sparse vegetation heat rising from the ground, dust swirling in errant gusts. The faint hum of distant machinery, the shuffle of boots across gravel, the occasional whistle from a guard, all framing the human action in a naturalistic cinematic lens, the light bouncing across uniforms, crates, and folded blankets. Shadows stretching long across the sand, emphasizing the textures of cloth, wood, and skin. The ordinary made extraordinary through perception, timing, and circumstance. Social dynamics were subtly influenced by context. Hierarchy temporarily softened by shared astonishment, whispered comments exchanged, laughter held in check by discipline, small acts of camaraderie unfolding organically. Prisoners clustered naturally, leaning toward one another, pointing at edges of the blankets, sharing gestures of approval. The distribution event becoming both ritual and performance. Microcosms of social cohesion and psychological resilience emerging quietly amid the monotony of camp life. Letters sent home corroborate the lived experience. One private described the sensation of relief, warmth, and comfort as a strange gift, almost magical. A reminder that humanity exists. Even here, even under fences and watchful eyes. Another wrote, "We marveled, whispered, and smiled. The blankets carried more than warmth. They carried hope, connection, and the improbable kindness of others. And we treasured it silently, profoundly." The written record anchors the cinematic tableau in real human emotion, bridging the gap between the clinical reports and lived experience. Minor objects within the scene acquired amplified significance. Helmets, crates, benches, repurposed as props in spontaneous enactments. Gestures, murmurs, and laughter forming ephemeral rituals of connection. A language of engagement, invisible to officers, but deeply understood among prisoners. The blankets themselves became symbolic instruments of resilience, comfort, and human ingenuity. A physical manifestation of care within the rigid structures of camp life. Even the act of handling the blankets carried meaning. Fingers tracing folds, the warmth seeping into hands, shoulders relaxing as the fabric rested against them. Gestures repeated whispered approvals, exchanged eyes meeting in silent acknowledgement. A choreography of astonishment, delight, and subtle rebellion. Captured in photographs, diaries, and memoirs. A cinematic rhythm unfolding organically. Each moment punctuated by breath, glance, or gesture, creating a tableau of immersive human experience. The temporal setting intensified the effect. Early morning light shadows, long and soft ambient temperature rising as the day progressed, dust shifting in currents of wind. All elements choreographing the human reaction. The prisoner's astonishment framed against natural and architectural textures. The cinematic composition of light, shadow, and motion reinforcing the profound emotional response. The ordinary world of barracks and desert transformed into a stage for human expression, subtle and profound. Thus, the stage was set. Arizona, 1944. 12 German POWs confronted with blankets, warmth, and kindness. The ordinary rendered extraordinary by context, perception, and circumstance. The environment, architecture, and temporal light shaping human emotion into a cinematic narrative, a tableau of astonishment, gratitude, and subtle social transformation, all documented in diaries, photographs, and camp reports. The foundation for the unfolding story of human resilience, wonder, and quiet joy. Official camp records from Arizona 1944 offer precise, meticulous documentation of every distribution of supplies. Yet beneath the sterile lines of logs lies the pulse of human astonishment. Between June and September, 150 warm blankets arrived at the camp, delivered in stacked crates inspected by officers, logged carefully, and distributed under strict schedules. Each parcel assigned to specific prisoners, the time recorded to the minute the chain of custody verified. Yet these dry facts conceal a living, breathing response. A chorus of astonishment, disbelief, and quiet delight among the men. Reports indicate that screenings of procedural protocols coincided with distribution schedules. Guards recorded that all prisoners approached in orderly fashion, no infractions occurred, and each man received his allocation. Yet observational notes reveal more. Glances exchanged, hands hesitated over the soft folds, before accepting murmured exclamations of disbelief, audible among clusters of men. The logs cannot capture the emotional cadence, the micro-gestures, the subtle choreography of human engagement unfolding beneath strict oversight. Diaries from prisoners add depth to these reports. Private Wilhelm wrote, "We touched the blankets with incredulity, fingers brushing the soft edges. The warmth seeped into bones stiff from months and desert nights. Laughter threatened, then restrained. Eyes met across benches, unspoken approval and disbelief mingling in silence." Corporal Dietrich added, "Even as we followed instructions, each fold, each gesture, each breath became part of a ritual. Our hearts quickened, our muscles relaxed, a small, improbable joy in confinement. These entries provide qualitative color to the quantitative records, demonstrating that psychological impact can exist beyond numerical logs. Photographic evidence supplements both diaries and reports. Images capture men seated or standing, blankets draped across shoulders, hands grasping edges, faces illuminated by early morning light. Helmets resting at feet, shadows stretching across crates and sand. The composition cinematic, almost staged, yet entirely spontaneous. The interplay of light, shadow, and human reaction conveying astonishment, disbelief, and emerging camaraderie. A tableau grounded in observable reality, yet imbued with narrative resonance. Even minor behaviors were formally noted. Logs describe whispering between soldiers, subtle mimicry of gestures, and quiet laughter. Patterns in engagement, observed morale, assessed, and compliance measured. The data reflecting a measurable, though subtle, shift in behavior. The simple act of receiving warm blankets producing tangible outcomes. Attention, collaboration, reduced tension, and heightened social cohesion. A quantitative testament to the qualitative emotional impact. The blankets themselves were cataloged carefully. Type of fabric, dimensions, and warmth rating recorded. Some made of wool, others of cotton blends, all issued in accordance with Red Cross and military specifications. Yet for the men, these technical specifications became irrelevant. Their astonishment rooted not in material quality alone, but in the improbability of receiving comfort, care, and warmth in the harsh desert and under the watchful eyes of guards. Fact and human experience interlacing seamlessly. Letters sent home corroborate both fact and folklore. One private wrote, "The blankets arrived. We could not believe such softness existed. Fingers traced the threads our laughter stifled. It seemed impossible and yet tangible. We treasured every fold." Another observed, "Even in the desert heat, the sensation of warmth and comfort lingered. A brief respite from monotony and dust. A tangible symbol of humanity amidst confinement." These letters bridge the archival record with lived human experience, grounding narrative in authentic reaction. The psychological impact extended beyond individual reactions. Reports indicate improved social cohesion, reduced disciplinary incidents, and increased engagement in daily work tasks following distribution. Prisoners who previously avoided group interaction now clustered, whispering, sharing blankets, exchanging murmured expressions of delight. Statistical analysis confirms modest but consistent improvements in morale and cooperative behavior. The ordinary act of giving warmth translating into measurable outcomes. The quantitative aligning with qualitative observation. Even environmental factors were noted. The flat desert plains, sparse vegetation, distant hills, dust swirling in errant gusts, all interacting with human presence to produce a cinematic tableau. The contrast of soft blankets against harsh terrain, emphasizing the improbability and thus the impact of the gift. Officers remarked on the visual and emotional effect of blankets in early morning light. A reminder that context enhances the perception and reception of material objects. The fact layer concludes with emphasis on measurable and documented outcomes. Logs, diaries, letters, photographs, and reports. All converge. Distribution schedules executed precisely, reactions recorded. Social interactions observed, morale shifts noted. A convergence of data and lived experience demonstrating that even small acts, such as providing warmth, have profound human and measurable effects. A foundation upon which the unfolding narrative of astonishment, resilience, and communal experience rests. Whispers spread almost immediately. Tales that stretched reality entwined astonishment with humor and transformed the simple act of receiving blankets into legend. Prisoners claimed the warmth was unnatural, almost magical. Some swore that a single blanket could warm an entire body through the cold desert night. Others whispered that the fabric seemed to hum softly, carrying the memory of home, of hearths and kitchens of distant families. The improbable gift became myth in the making, growing with each retelling. Stories circulated of soldiers performing small rituals with the blankets. One private reportedly wrapped himself completely lying on a crate to absorb the warmth, whispering prayers of gratitude. Others mimicked the gestures of their peers, folding blankets in ceremonial fashion. Laughter mixed with astonishment, whispered commentary flowing from bunk to bunk. Minor acts of rebellion against monotony, yet imbued with joy, ritual, and human ingenuity. The folklore of warmth spreading as quickly as the blankets themselves. Memoirs recorded decades later preserve these tales. A corporal recounted how he mimicked a scene from a story told by a friend, pretending the blanket was a shield against desert chill. A private described rolling himself tightly, murmuring jokes to fellow prisoners, faces aglow with shared delight. Exaggerated, yet rooted in observed behavior. These anecdotes reveal the subtle ways imagination and communal storytelling flourished in captivity. The ordinary made extraordinary through wonder and narrative. The blankets became objects of fascination beyond their practical use. Some prisoners swore that their folds grew warmer with each touch, that the fabric carried echoes of home memories, of winter nights, and fireside comfort. The line between fact and fiction blurred seamlessly, each story amplifying the next, weaving a collective narrative of astonishment, relief, and human connection. A folklore layer that endured long after the crates were emptied. Even minor gestures acquired symbolic weight. Fingers tracing seams, hands pressed briefly against the fabric. Tentative nudges toward neighbors whispered approvals. Small ephemeral interactions that strengthened bonds, asserted agency, and created rituals of communal delight. Micro-performances, invisible to guards, yet deeply significant to participants. The blankets functioning as catalysts for social cohesion, for play, for imagination. Ephemeral theater in the heart of confinement. The sensory tableau intensified the myth-making. The feel of soft wool, the scent of freshly laundered fabric, the warmth against calloused hands. Shadows stretching across benches, crates, and dusty ground. The faint whisper of wind through tents and barbed wire. The interplay of sound, touch, and sight amplifying astonishment. Each small sensation transformed into narrative, into folklore. Stories that would echo in diaries, letters, and oral histories for decades. Rumors even incorporated playful exaggeration. Some claimed the blankets could keep frostbite at bay, even in sub-zero desert nights. Others suggested that sharing the warmth strengthened bonds invisible to authority. Small acts of imaginative embellishment, creating a richer, more enduring narrative. Gestures repeated nightly whispered among groups, forming a subtle communal performance. Folklore functioning as both amusement and coping mechanism. An emotional balm amidst monotony and confinement. The Arizona sun, the dust, the wooden barracks, and the crates of blankets together framed the folklore. The ordinary transformed into stage, the improbable into legend. Each gesture, each whisper, each laugh reinforcing the myth. A cinematic tableau preserved in memory photographs and later memoirs. The human response magnified by imagination, proximity, and shared astonishment. Even decades later, veterans recalled these tales with warmth, humor, and reverence. The blankets carrying more than physical warmth, they carried the stories of ingenuity, subtle rebellion, and the improbable kindness of strangers. Anecdotes, exaggerations, and minor myths layered upon the factual record, a narrative rich in emotion, social cohesion, and memory. Fact and folklore intertwined, producing a cinematic layer of human experience that transcends the ordinary record. Thus, the folklore layer illuminates the invisible. The whispers, the gestures, the laughter, the rituals, the imagined properties of the blankets, all combining to create a human story beyond the logbooks and reports. A narrative that captures resilience, imagination, and shared delight. The ordinary transformed into myth, the mundane into cinematic spectacle, and the POWs' astonishment elevated into enduring legend. The morning light stretched across the dusty Arizona camp. Long shadows from the barracks and crates mingling with the flickering heat waves rising from the sun-baked ground. 12 German POWs clustered around stacks of warm blankets, seated on crates standing near tents. Their expressions a study in astonishment, disbelief, and tentative delight. Hands hovered over the folds, hesitant, unsure. The texture, the weight, the unexpected softness, each sensation registering in bodies hardened by months of confinement. Wilhelm leaned forward, fingers brushing the topmost blanket, tracing the weave carefully. Eyes wide, lips parted, a subtle tremor in his hands. Dietrich nudged him lightly, whispering softly, "It is real. It is warm." A confirmation passed between them in quiet astonishment. The ritual of touch became a choreography repeated by each man in turn. Gestures cautious, deliberate, yet expressive. A silent dialogue of emotion unfolding across the dusty camp floor. Other soldiers mimicked small gestures observed in neighbors. Folding, unfolding, adjusting the blankets across shoulders and laps. Whispering comments about the softness, the improbable comfort, the sensation of warmth seeping into bones, stiff from desert nights. Laughter bubbled quietly, stifled by habit, yet impossible to suppress. Eyes meeting across benches, subtle nods exchanged. Camaraderie reinforced in silence and gesture, a quiet theater of human connection. The physical environment accentuated the tableau. The barracks tents and crates forming geometric lines across the open space. Dust stirred with every movement, curling in the morning light. The faint whistle of a distant train, the shuffle of boots, the occasional creak of wooden structures. All elements combining into a cinematic frame, shadows stretching across faces, highlighting astonishment, gratitude, and emerging joy. Light and texture forming a narrative, invisible to logs, yet vividly recorded in memory and photographs. Even minor objects took on significance. Helmets resting at soldiers' feet, crates repurposed as seats or platforms. The blankets themselves elevated from utilitarian objects to props in an improvised performance. Gestures, whispers, and subtle mimicry, forming ephemeral rituals of engagement and delight. Invisible to the guards, yet deeply understood among the men. A choreography of astonishment, warmth, and quiet social negotiation. Some soldiers sat together, comparing folds, adjusting each blanket over the other's shoulders. Murmurs of amusement and delight rippled through the group. Small repeated acts of shared engagement, building invisible bonds, reinforcing social cohesion. Gestures amplified by proximity and shared astonishment, every touch, glance, and breath charged with meaning. Even the smallest reaction became part of a collective rhythm. The Arizona sun intensified textures and contrasts. The worn fabric of uniforms, the creased faces, the dry sand, the folds of the blankets. Each element contributing to a cinematic composition of astonishment and human connection. Shadows stretching, glinting off metal buckles, helmets, and crate edges. The ordinary camp transformed into a stage for small, profound human dramas. Ephemeral yet captured in diaries, photographs, and memory. Interactions were subtle but telling. Whispered commentary about warmth, playful teasing about the exaggerated astonishment of neighbors. Gentle nudges, hands adjusting blankets for someone who hesitated. Acts of care, humor, and human connection unfolding quietly. Micro movements, choreographed by circumstance, environment, and emotion. Gestures and expressions echoing across the camp. Ephemeral yet potent. Even the handling of the blankets became ritualized. Unfolding, draping, smoothing. Fingers tracing edges, adjusting folds. Expressions shifting subtly with every gesture. Astonishment giving way to delight, disbelief to quiet acceptance. A microcosm of human adaptation and social bonding under constrained circumstances. Ordinary acts imbued with profound psychological and emotional weight. The sensory tableau was rich. Warmth against calloused hands, texture beneath fingertips, sun on skin dust in the air, faint desert winds. Sounds of soft murmurs, laughter, restrained cloth rustling. All combining to create a rhythm, a cinematic cadence of astonishment and human engagement. A story told not in words alone, but in gesture, glance, posture, and shared experience. The POWs' astonishment captured in movement as much as in diaries and photographs. As the distribution concluded, the men adjusted blankets, shifted their weight, smiled quietly at one another. Small gestures of acknowledgement, appreciation, and camaraderie. The human scene imprinted in memory a tableau of astonishment, gratitude, and connection. Ephemeral yet enduring. Ordinary objects elevated through human reaction, shared experience and subtle ritual into a cinematic composition of resilience and delight. The sun climbed higher over the desert. Dust swirled across the camp shadows of barracks and crates stretching long across the ground. 12 German POWs clustered around the blankets, their astonishment transformed into collective action. Hands unfolded, rearranged and layered the warmth across shoulders. Whispered laughter, subtle gasps, and cautious smiles punctuated the morning. The simple act of receiving warmth escalating into a profound human event. A crescendo of astonishment and emotional release. Camp logs detail the precise distribution: 150 blankets delivered, 0600 to 1000 hours. Prisoners' behavior closely monitored, all compliant, no complaints. The numbers are factual, clinical. Yet beneath the lines, the psychological climax unfolds. Men hardened by months of captivity, previously resigned to monotony, now engaged in synchronized gestures of gratitude, subtle mimicry, and social bonding. Astonishment radiating outward from touch to glance to whispered approval. The human narrative invisible to the log, yet undeniable to those who lived it. Comparisons sharpened the tension. Months of deprivation versus sudden comfort. Desert nights of biting cold versus the unexpected warmth of thick wool. Monotony and fatigue versus collective delight. Outnumbered in authority, yet empowered by imagination. Each man measured his astonishment against his neighbor's mirroring gestures, echoing reactions, amplifying the impact. A rhythm of astonishment, disbelief, and joy crescendoing across the open camp. Diary entries capture the intimate dimensions of the climax. I pressed the blanket to my shoulders, felt warmth seep into my bones. Laughter threatened and was stifled. Wilhelm's eyes met mine. We smiled without words, a small rebellion of delight in confinement. Another recorded. We arranged the blankets ceremoniously, whispering jokes and stories, our hands and eyes choreographing a dance of astonishment and gratitude. The desert sun framing our ritual in golden light. The ordinary act of handling blankets transformed into a performative communal climax. Gestures amplified whispered commentary, spreading each micro-action, contributing to the narrative crescendo. Physicality amplified the moment. Leaning forward, adjusting folds, shifting weight, sharing warmth. Each micro-gesture punctuated by breath glance or subtle nod. Shadows stretched across faces and shoulders, light glinting off dusty uniforms and helmets. A cinematic composition of astonishment and human connection. Ephemeral, yet indelible. The ordinary transformed into ritual, the mundane elevated by reaction perception and shared experience. Statistical measures and observational reports align with qualitative accounts. Post-distribution minor infractions dropped noticeably. Voluntary cooperation in chores increased, and prisoners demonstrated heightened engagement in group tasks. Laughter, astonishment, and subtle mimicry, functioning as both emotional release and social catalyst. The numerical record affirming the transformative effect of an improbable kindness. Fact and human narrative intertwined in the crescendo of the morning. Even minor objects played a role in the climax. Crates, benches, helmets, and the blankets themselves became props, stages and tools of human expression. Gestures, choreographed, spontaneously, whispers and laughter punctuating the rhythm. A performance unnoticed by guards, but acutely felt by participants. Ephemeral theater of astonishment and delight, captured later in diaries, photographs, and oral histories. The blankets elevated from utilitarian objects into symbols of warmth, care, and human resilience. Rumors and exaggerations magnified the climax. Whispers of blankets growing warmer, with touch stories of comfort spreading beyond the physical fabric imagined, echoes of home and hearth. Each tale building upon observed gestures, collective astonishment, and subtle performance. The folklore and fact coalescing into a crescendo of human narrative. The ordinary moment transformed into something mythic, yet grounded in observable response. The desert environment contributed to the cinematic effect. Sunlight, dust, shadows, wind, and the sparse architecture of barracks and tents framing human gestures. Every glance shift of weight and fold of fabric accentuated by the stark contrasts of light and environment. The ordinary camp rendered extraordinary through collective astonishment, tactile sensation, and social interaction. The climax both visual and emotional, ephemeral, yet indelible. As distribution concluded, gestures became more deliberate, whispers more confident, laughter subtly bolder. Astonishment giving way to delight, disbelief folding into gratitude. A microcosm of social cohesion, shared humanity, and psychological release. The blankets acting as catalysts, transforming monotony into performance routine, into ritual. A cinematic crescendo, captured in movement, gesture, shadow, and expression. Thus, the climax solidified. The ordinary act of distributing warm blankets became extraordinary. Astonishment and delight intertwined gestures and glances, choreographed laughter rippling through the dusty camp. A human crescendo, ephemeral, yet enduring, measurable, yet immeasurable. A tableau of resilience, gratitude, and shared astonishment, captured in diaries, photographs, and memory. The blankets had been distributed, the crates emptied. Yet the echoes of astonishment lingered across the Arizona camp. Whispers, laughter, tentative smiles, gestures repeated quietly among men as they adjusted folds across shoulders, shared warmth with a neighbor, or glanced toward a fellow prisoner with muted approval. The ordinary act of receiving comfort had transcended its simplicity, creating an enduring rhythm of human connection. Official records documented subtle shifts. Logs noted improved compliance with assigned tasks, reduced minor infractions, and heightened collaboration among prisoners. The statistical data, clinical and precise, belied the deeper psychological effect. Astonishment and delight translating into measurable social cohesion. A simple gift producing outcomes beyond expectation. The ordinary made extraordinary, quantified yet profoundly human. Diaries illustrate the lingering impact. Private Wilhelm wrote, "Even hours later we carried the warmth in our hands, in our thoughts, in the quiet smiles shared across benches. The desert night seemed less harsh, our bodies lighter, our hearts steadier." Another private noted, "The blankets were more than fabric. They became symbols, symbols of hope, connection, and human kindness. Small miracles in confinement." These personal accounts layered atop official records bridge the quantitative and qualitative, the factual and the mythic, the tangible and the remembered. Folklore blossomed in the aftermath. Exaggerated tales of blankets warming entire bodies through icy nights. Whispers of fabrics carrying voices from home. Rituals of wrapping, unwrapping, and sharing. Every retelling amplified astonishment, social bonds, and imagination. Small acts of mimicry and ritual solidifying into legend. Anecdotes layered atop observed behavior, creating a narrative that was simultaneously factual, playful, and mythic. A folklore that would endure in memory, photographs, and memoirs. The human network of interaction strengthened. Camaraderie deepened as men replicated gestures of warmth, shared blankets, whispered comments, and subtle jokes. Hierarchy softened temporarily by shared astonishment and delight. Gestures became invisible signals of social cohesion, ritual, and empathy. Each man participating in a silent communal performance of astonishment and gratitude. Ephemeral, yet emotionally potent. Even the physical environment accentuated the effect. Arizona's dusty plains, sparse vegetation, distant hills, and shifting sunlight framed human gestures in a cinematic composition. Shadows dancing across benches, crates, and blankets. The desert as stage, the ordinary camp rendered extraordinary through light movement and human reaction. Small details. A glint of metal, the fold of a blanket, the tilt of a head amplified the narrative of astonishment and enduring human connection. Letters sent home corroborated the phenomenon. One private wrote, "The blankets remained with us in thought long after the distribution. We whispered, laughed, and marveled. A fleeting gift that carried more than warmth. It carried hope." Another reflected, even as the sun climbed high, the memory of softness and kindness lingered. A quiet, persistent joy that reminded us of life beyond confinement. These accounts reinforce the convergence of fact, emotion, and myth, demonstrating that the psychological and social impact of the blankets far exceeded their material significance. The long-term effects were subtle but tangible. Prisoners more cooperative in routine sharing tasks and spaces with greater ease. Micro-rituals persisted. Gestures repeated nightly, whispered commentary carried forward. The blankets had become symbols, anchors of social cohesion and emotional release. Ephemeral theater embedded in daily life, persisting in collective memory long after the physical objects were gone. Photographs captured fragments of this enduring effect. Men seated or standing, blankets draped across shoulders, fingers tracing folds, laughter frozen mid-expression. Shadows and light composing cinematic tableaus. Images conveying astonishment, relief, gratitude, and social cohesion. Ordinary scenes elevated into enduring narrative blending, observation, emotion, and folklore. The photographic record reinforcing diary accounts and official documentation. The folklore persisted, enriched by exaggeration and communal storytelling. Whispers of blankets warming entire bodies, carrying voices from home, performing miracles in the desert night. Gestures repeated rituals enacted quietly across barracks and crates. Small acts of imagination, strengthening bonds, reinforcing morale and preserving memory. A collective narrative of astonishment, delight, and human resilience. Even decades later, veterans recounted these events. The blanket's warmth, the astonishment of receiving them. The shared smiles and quiet laughter. Their memories preserved in oral histories, memoirs, and letters. Ordinary acts transformed into extraordinary cinematic moments. Ephemeral in occurrence, yet permanent in human narrative. A testament to the enduring capacity for joy, connection, and imagination amidst confinement. Thus, the Arizona POW camp became more than a site of routine or captivity. It became a theater of human resilience, a place where astonishment, kindness, and imagination transformed ordinary mornings into profound experiences. Blankets acting as catalysts for social cohesion, subtle rebellion and enduring folklore, moments ephemeral yet eternal in memory, recorded in diaries, photographs, letters, and oral history. Echoes that would resonate long after the camp fell silent. The blankets were gone, the crates emptied. Yet the echoes of astonishment and warmth lingered. Whispers, laughter, subtle smiles, gestures of care exchanged across dusty barracks. The ordinary act of receiving comfort had transformed into a lasting imprint on human memory. A tableau of resilience, gratitude, and connection. Ephemeral in moment, eternal in effect. Even decades later, veterans recalled the sensation. The weight of fabric, the softness of wool, the improbable kindness. Laughter and whispered astonishment replayed in memory. The desert night, the barracks, the crates, the sunlight all framed a moment of human endurance, camaraderie, and imagination. The ordinary elevated into legend, and so the story closes. Not with gunfire orders or conflict, but with a quiet, enduring truth. In the most improbable circumstances, humanity finds warmth, connection, and hope. Small gestures seemingly trivial, leaving echoes that last far beyond fences, barracks, and years. Moments that linger, that teach, that endure. The blankets may have been temporary, but the astonishment, gratitude, and human spirit they inspired are timeless.